Our seminar today is focused on the big European project that we were doing with European partners from the 2Cs area and Portsmouth as well, our project ORPHEUS. Just to talk you through the structure of the session, I will be giving a brief introduction to the project and some of the main aspects of what we've managed to do in the past 4 years in the context of the project. And then we will have a panel discussion with some colleagues from the project from Belgium and the UK to discuss the various different developments and outputs from the project, but also steps ahead and how we see things being implemented in the future, what we've designed from ORPHEUS. And then we will open for your questions. My colleague Annie will be collecting your questions from the chat. Please do put any questions in the chat. We'll collect these in a document, and then I will be chairing the panel after my presentation, and I will be asking the panel your questions, or will try to answer them myself as well if they relate to something I have said. So hopefully now everything is in the room, and I will share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see the slides. Yeah, excellent. I might not be able to see the chat, Annie, on my other screen, so please, if there's anything, do let me know. Okay, so our ORPHEUS project is focused on fostering resilience. Oh, there's something in the chat already. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So fostering resilience in young people against violent extremism through novel online and offline prevention interventions. And you can see our kind of buzzwords were think critically, speak freely, and come together, and I'll explain how all that ties into the project and what we've tried to do. You can see all the very nice logos from all the partners at the bottom. So we've got the City of Mechelen, Portsmouth City Council, the University of Portsmouth in terms of the Cybercrime Awareness Clinic, Artevelde Hochschule in Kent, the Greta Grand Littoral from France, an educational organization, CPIRE, a youth worker, social worker group in Antwerp, UCR, University College Roosevelt in the Netherlands, and Contourted Wern, another social work, youth work organization, again in the Netherlands. So this covers the 2Cs areas, south of England and north of France, and then, you know, the northwestern parts of Belgium and the Netherlands as well. So it was a very interesting project for us. We worked together with different colleagues from different sectors across those areas, and I think it was a very educational, very pleasant experience. We built some really nice relationships with colleagues, and we'll miss that interaction now that the project finishes, but we hope that we can continue the work of ORPHEUS in the future. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we do our panel discussion later. Just to give you a little bit of context, here are the partners, and you can see we split them into pilot partners and knowledge partners, and obviously the universities involved in the process were the knowledge partners, providing the academic background and theoretical background in many cases, and then the partners with red letters where the pilot partners were, we were testing all our different developments and trainings and other outputs that we will discuss. The duration of our project was 4 years. It lasted a little bit longer than initially anticipated because of COVID. As you can imagine, COVID posed very significant problems to a project that was all about public engagement and interaction with young people when we had lockdowns across all of the countries involved. and we couldn't really go out and meet young people. So we had to sort of reinvent the project halfway through, and try to find different ways, hybrid ways of doing what we were aiming to do. That was very interesting because we were forced to develop new processes and new tools for what we were trying to achieve with the project, but it also posed significant challenges in terms of whether we could actually reach the people that we wanted to reach to the extent that we like to have done so. We also have 33 observer partners from across the 2Cs areas and even beyond, and these involve other city council and academic organizations, but also practitioners and other organizations working in the wider area of prevention of violent extremism, but also social work and academic work in this area. We had a large budget of 4.3 million that was subsidized by Interact 2Cs, which is an EU Commission organization, by 60%, and then the rest was supported by the participating organizations as well. So the project goal was to develop and pilot an innovative well-being oriented prevention model to tackle the risk factors that can lead young people towards extremism in democratic societies. And we tried to achieve that by providing professionals that were working with young people, and by that we mean, youth workers, social workers, and teachers in schools, but also policymakers with the knowledge and the tools to support young people. So we did a lot of work with all these groups in terms of providing trainings and even policy recommendations and other tools that we'll discuss in order to assist them in fostering resilience to violent extremist narratives. We try to create safe spaces for young people, and that concept has been a core element of the project from the beginning, where the young people can air their grievances, and we try to support them in fighting the injustices they face and feel included and listened to in order to reduce the amount of social tension. And we also try to emphasize the agency of young people. Another core element of the project was obviously the co-creation and the participation of young people in the whole process, because one of the issues that we've identified is that a lot of these responses are top-down responses, and sometimes the young people feel they are not being listened to. This is very consistent with the work we're doing with the clinic. Whenever we're doing cyber awareness in general, that's a common problem with young people feeling that a lot of the advice and support is coming from top-down sources that don't really understand their needs and their desires and how they want to operate in their everyday environment. So we wanted to give young people more agency in the whole process within the context of the project in order to develop the responses in a way that would be consistent with what they wanted to see. So ORPHEUS targeted the interplay of risk factors for violent extremism by trying to strengthen the positive networks for young people, offer legitimate channels for young people to express the grievances publicly, and non-violent ones as well, and promote positive alternatives to violent extremist narratives. In many cases, for example, we see there's an issue with doing counter narratives that are trying to counter the extremist narratives, and that can end up reinforcing these narratives rather than tackle them. So we try to develop more positive rationales and more positive narratives that were not necessarily immediately tackling and directly tackling the narratives that we were trying to guard young people against or empower young people against, let's say. And we created a few videos that you can access through some codes, QR codes that we'll share in the slides later on. We also developed guidance and policy recommendations for adoption of our integrated prevention method in the 2Cs areas and even beyond. So we'll discuss later towards the end of this presentation and also during the panel what the policy recommendations were, and it was all based on our experience from the project, but also our theoretical analysis of what we were trying to achieve and what worked and what didn't work, based on feedback that we received from the young people and the professionals and even the policymakers interacting with our outputs. So we used the puzzle model, which focuses on the fusion of these elements, grievances, networks, ideologies, and enabling environments in order to explain how radicalization might happen, but also how to tackle radicalization and violent extremism, and adopts a much more kind of puzzle looking process rather than a linear process of how radicalization can happen. And that was very helpful for us because it allowed us to map our interventions and our outputs and our deliverables in a similar way, looking at these elements of the puzzle model. So just to give you an idea, for example, we tried to create the safe spaces for young people, and we felt that these would support them in expressing their grievances in an environment where they will feel comfortable to do so, and not feeling they were risking any retaliation or any kind of legal issues. We strengthened young people's positive networks, bringing young people together across the various different areas. And we also try to address sensitive issues in open dialogue. Yeah, so a lot of our training, for example, with professionals related to having difficult conversations and to enabling them to do safe spaces in a safe way for them, but also for the young people. So, as I said, we created training for teachers and youth workers, and that was meant to increase the knowledge and the skills and the confidence of professionals, because we were identifying a lack of confidence in relation to the ability of youth workers, social workers, teachers in schools to tackle issues like that, and allow young people to express themselves and feel they were capable to manage difficult conversations in this way. So for us, the training on managing difficult conversations and dealing with difficult conversations was an overarching training that encompassed a lot of the other trainings that we also developed along those lines. A very core element, as you saw at the beginning, the project focused on online and offline counter-radicalization of young people, and therefore we felt the online safety of young people was key, and it played a very important role. So we tried to develop trainings for professionals to feel more comfortable to tackle issues like fake news and propaganda and educate young people around these areas. But we also developed online awareness trainings for the young people themselves in order to be a bit more resilient to grooming attempts or any other cyber risks that might put them in a difficult position. And we also try to build resilience to any ideological grooming. And finally, through these alternatives, we try to reinforce this effort to build resilience, but also offer positive alternatives for young people to look at and follow in case they wanted to change from violent extremist narratives and not go down a path that might be problematic. We tend to sometimes maybe focus on counter narratives, and the alternatives for us were very important because we could give them a positive story without necessarily linking that positive story to any of the narratives regarding violent extremism that they might be engaging with. So, as we said, we co-created with young people, and we had a lot of young people participate in safe space sessions in pilot cities, and 96% of those participating in those sessions reported feeling less socially alienated, which was one of our main goals, to create spaces where young people could come in and feel, and this seems very simplistic, but there were a lot of elements that constituted the concept of social alienation that we asked young people to highlight any kind of differences before and after their participation in the trainings that we did. We also reached more than 500 young people who attended cyber awareness and online safety training. I have to highlight here that obviously the results that we're reporting do not cover all the students and young people that participated in our trainings. So it was very difficult to actually get the young people to complete these questionnaires in their entirety, but from the percentage that we had, 95% reported being either a little or a lot more aware of the impact of online disinformation and misinformation, which was really important for us because we see in modern information societies that misinformation and disinformation, bearing in mind also this was happening during COVID, where we saw a huge increase in online activity, but also in online misinformation and disinformation on various different issues. For us, that was, a very crucial and very positive result. We then developed trainings for professionals, as I mentioned, teachers, youth workers, social workers, and so on. And as I said, our umbrella training was dealing with controversial issues. That was for us very important because we felt it encompassed all the other elements that we wanted to address in a way. Then we developed critical literacy and online awareness, which again related to fake news, propaganda, and grooming attempts. Also strengthening online safety in safe spaces was another training we developed, and working with youth culture, which was very, very important in terms of looking at the different elements of youth culture and finding the positive elements to discuss within that. And also a training for professionals on politicization and how to manage politicization with young people. So our goal was to make the professionals more confident in topic-specific competencies, but also in the more general Orpheus competencies. And we see the results were very positive here from the respondents. 90% of those professionals that participated in our trainings felt more confident in the topic-specific competencies from the trainings that they attended. And 83% felt more confident in general Orpheus competencies, which related to developing safe spaces for young people, addressing sensitive issues in open dialogue, strengthening positive networks, and building resilience to emotional manipulation. Alongside the critical thinking, emotional manipulation for us is really important because we see that it is a crucial element in terms of grooming young people towards violent extremism as well. So we have created downloadable training manuals and resource packs for professionals trainings, and these can be adapted. They're very modular. We love that word in the project, how we developed, Annie's laughing because that's a constant kind of thing we say, because we developed trainings that can be adjusted to the needs and the focal points of the trainers. And they can be longer or shorter or updated to focus on particular case studies that whoever is doing the training might want to focus on. And we have downloadable guidance manuals for the professionals that relate to safe to brave spaces, get up, stand up, and politicization, creating alternative content and online dialogue in chat rooms and chat apps as well. So if you go to our website, you will be able to find a lot of the content that we have created in those areas. We also created alternative films, and it's a shame our colleague Youssef Naimi from CPIRE is not with us today. Unfortunately, he had a family emergency that he had to deal with, so he won't be joining us for the panel. But it's a shame because he was very much involved in the design and the creation of these alternative videos. And these are short films that we have created to present positive alternatives to violent extremist narratives and to support the discussion, sometimes in a funny way, about topics relevant to young people. And these include sketches, infographics, discussions, and morale boosters as well. So there's a QR code if you want to have a look later. We also did webinars like this one, and we created recordings of those webinars aimed at professionals covering a range of topics relevant to the stakeholders that we interacted with. And this focused on the extreme right on social media, creation of safe spaces, utilizing the positive effects of online gaming. Online gaming has been, a very interesting platform for our colleagues in Contour de Verne, for example, and Cipire. We talked about Islamic reform movements, and we also talked about the far right and conspiracy theories. So again, through this QR code, you should be able to access these. And then we created some policy recommendations, mainly focusing on a model that is the pyramid model, as we call it, of interventions. And we focused mainly on levels 2 and 3, so general prevention and specific prevention. So just to give you an idea of how our recommendations are grouped, our first recommendation was the need to develop safe spaces as a concept more in terms of what it entails. Through the process of doing safe spaces, we created a new concept for us, which is the concept of brave spaces, for example, and how we can move from safe spaces to brave spaces where people can feel a bit more brave to come forward and talk about their grievances and concerns. Then we also talked about measuring the needs of young people through active dialogue. For us, this is a constant thing that needs to happen on a regular basis. It's very important for policymakers and for anyone involved in this process to actually have a constant feedback loop where we can see what the main issues are for young people, because they totally shift on a regular basis, but also what the platforms are that they engage with, what are the gaming platforms, what are the social media platforms. Again, working in cyber awareness, for example, we see that young people can move from one platform to another very, very quickly. By the time we realize they're using, for example, one certain platform, they've moved to a different one that offers different opportunities and obviously poses different challenges. And the biggest challenge with newer platforms is that they are very often not as regulated as more established platforms that they might be using in previous years. So there's always this chasing of the developments and the technology, but also the need for engagement with young people more consistently and throughout the year. We need to also establish and preserve partnerships with civil society organizations. If we don't have, we need to start engaging with civil society organizations. And if we do have relationships, then we need to nurture those and preserve them because they can reinforce these efforts. We need a network of stakeholders. We can't expect, that was very, very clear when we were doing Orpheus, we can't expect one actor and one stakeholder to actually take this on their own. This requires a multi-stakeholder grassroots effort in order to provide responses with the young people involved in this process as well. And we also need to establish a prevention network or join an existing one, which sort of links with the previous one. If we want to prevent violent extremist acts from happening or people joining violent extremist groups, then we do need to create a network that can identify when there's risks of that kind of nature and try to assist anyone that might be at risk. In terms of more specific prevention, responding directly to risk factors, we need to develop safe spaces to tackle the interplay of risk factors. As I said, not just the concept, but also practically develop these safe spaces in order to allow the professionals and the young people to come together and tackle these risk factors that come together from that puzzle model that we mentioned. We need to train professionals more to raise their confidence and skills in addressing risk factors. We often saw that professionals were finding it difficult to deal with difficult conversations. They were not very aware. A lot of the things we actually developed as trainings, we were not 100% aware before we started developing the training. So it was a very educational experience for us as well. And then when we interacted with the professionals, we saw that skills gap that existed, because these are all new skills that we were trying to develop. For example, when we're talking about deep fakes and fake news and propaganda online and how to spot misinformation, that was something that is now becoming a big thing in our society, and we felt it was really crucial to actually try and address that. We need to support young people and professionals in discussing controversial issues, and invest in the effort and the spaces where this can happen, and support the professionals to support young people to do this, and support young people in their struggle against injustice. We always talk to young people, and we felt that a lot of them felt they were not supported by any kind of structure in their context in order to actually express the issues that they were facing in society. So we need to give them that opportunity and support them in making their voice stronger in society in relation to any injustices they might be facing. We need to emphasize their agency in prevention work. We try to work with young people as much as possible. As I said, COVID proved to be a very difficult hurdle for us in terms of integrating young people as much as we would like to have done throughout the project, but we still managed to do it. And I think we have shown that this is really important in terms of co-developing and co-creating the trainings or any kind of support networks that the young people will find legitimate to interact with. Because if we invest in this process and we exclude young people, they will not feel as if they belong there as well. And it's very likely we will create something that they will not feel is relevant to them as well. And we need to support young people to develop their critical literacy and online awareness. We saw how important that was, because there's this presumption that we see all the time with the clinic that young people use technology, they are born with technology, and they're very aware of these issues. But the reality is, yes, they use technology a lot, but sometimes they might not be as aware as we think they are, and they might be in need of some support and guidance in relation to these issues. So it's really important for us to support them in this way, and also to promote positive alternatives, give them role models to think about. One very interesting role model for us, for example, were young people that were working in news verification services, or were working in organizations that would spot fake news and show people how to highlight fake news and report fake news. So for us, that was a very interesting alternative model that was not necessarily tied to the violent extremist narratives, but at the same time was related to what we were trying to inspire through the project. This is, in a nutshell, we could be talking for hours, because as you can imagine, a lot has happened in the past 4 years in the project. But we also felt that it's perhaps more interesting to have a discussion. We really enjoyed the final event we did in the city of Mechelen in November. And we had some really lovely panels where many of the colleagues in the project were allowed to express their kind of views and experiences from the project. So I think we'll now move to the panel discussion. I will be chairing, and then my colleagues, Hilde Lauwers from the city of Mechelen, Bart van Boekhouten. Is it correct, Bart? No, Boekhouten? No? I tried. Everyone calls me Dr. Vas, so it's a better step. And Charlie Pericleus from the city of Portsmouth City Council will join me now, and we are going to have a discussion. Please, as Annie says in the chat, if you have any questions for the panel, type them in the chat, and we will collect them all. And then if we haven't addressed them, we will try to address them after the panel discussion. I will stop sharing my screen now so I can see everyone, which will make it much easier for me to actually do the panel as well. So just give me a second. Are there any questions so far? No? No questions? Can the panelists unmute? Are you okay to unmute, or is it still banned for you? Can we do a test? No, you can't? Okay, let me change the security settings. Should be able to now. Yeah, good. Okay. So let me start with Charlie. Charlie, can you let us know how did the pilots work out for the city here in Portsmouth, and what were the challenges you faced working with the different organizations that you did in the area to deliver the pilots?
Yeah, thanks, Vas. Hopefully you can hear me. In Portsmouth, we mainly focused on the two trainings, the one you mentioned, the overriding training, which was dealing with controversial issues, but also the critical literacy and online awareness. So I guess the first thing to say is there was a real appetite amongst educational establishments to have this training for the reasons you mentioned before, that online awareness and online safety is a really big issue, and also dealing with sensitive issues in a safe environment is also a big issue as well. So there's a real appetite there. I think the big challenge for us was mainly around two things: was time and capacity to deliver the training. So obviously we're in the midst of and just after COVID, really. So actually to have access to delivering the training to young people and professionals was really difficult during that period of time. What had happened was almost all organizations had very little time. So what they did, they focused on their real key priorities. And that meant our opportunity to go into these organizations was quite limited. So we moved essentially to an online kind of position where we delivered in certain organizations, a lot of the sessions were done online. So we kind of pivoted towards that approach. So that was the capacity issue. But I mean, just looking at the stats, we had over 400 young people in Portsmouth and about 100 professionals delivered to over that period of time. So that was a big effort for us in the city. And also what we did was we used a mixed method of approach. So we used two youth charities in the city. So Motivate, for those in Portsmouth, you would have heard of Motivate, that works with vulnerable young people, but also Unlock, which is, it's also a youth charity, but it works more in the education setting. So we used delivery from our team, but also with two youth charities. And we used an individual that was, I guess you could say, a conflict resolution expert, John Nicholas, who had some experience in delivering work around safe spaces in the UK, but also internationally as well. So we utilised those organisations, that individual, to deliver where we couldn't, we felt they were best placed to deliver. So we used that mixed method to try and get those sessions when it was most difficult. But the feedback we got was really, really, really good. And I think that was partly because we'd worked with, and I might mention this later on, is that the way we developed the training, that we were very flexible in terms of timings, that we gave you the option that you could deliver it within kind of an hour, 3 hours, and even a longer training as well. So we're very conscious that we wanted to provide that flexibility. And again, we're very keen to say that the training is not prescriptive. So it's really there to support you. So if you do look at the training products on our website, and I really encourage people to do that, is that it's there to support your conversations, it's there to support your training. So it's not something that you have to follow exactly. And we were very, very keen to stress that as well. And also the other thing I think I want to mention before the other questions was, if we're being entirely honest, we try to hang the trainings on existing responsibilities that these organizations had as well. So I think if we're taking the approach, if we hadn't done that, I think these organizations, especially schools that are hugely busy, they would really not have time to do it. So the way we framed it was that it's going to help meet your obligations around citizenship. It's going to help meet your obligations around the prevent duty. It's going to help meet your statutory obligations, but also your obligations that are for your own specific sector. So we tried to deal. I think that was particularly helpful in our experience. So otherwise, I don't think people would take it up because they're got their other commitments, other priorities within their organisations. And also, I guess the last thing is, as a local authority, we generally work on extremism, prevention of extremism. However, this approach we've taken was quite refreshing in the sense that we acknowledge that we're dealing with extremism within the project, but it wasn't our sole aim. It was around building resilience, it's around building critical thinking, it's around strengthening some of those ties that they had. So we dealt with it in a more indirect way, and what that did was it allowed greater engagement with the young people, but also greater engagement with other organisations that particularly may not have worked, if I'm being totally honest, may not have worked with us directly on a project that we'd be dealing with prevention of extremism. And some of the work that I've done in an academic setting and work with other partners is there is sometimes a degree of nervousness amongst organisations to work on projects that totally just solely deal with prevention of extremism because of aspects of stigmatization and things like that. So we took a much broader approach, and that really kind of paid dividends in terms of our engagement around this issue. So I think I've waffled enough about that.
No, I think you've highlighted some very interesting points, because one was the modularity, how flexible the training was, and then the challenges with COVID and how we try to innovate and do that mixing of the methods and also engage with different stakeholders. But you also highlighted something we've seen with the clinic on a constant kind of level with all our engagement, which is we need to embed ourselves in existing processes and events that our partners have created and are well attended, because when we're trying to do something that is just solely about a particular project, then it's not going to be as successful, especially with organizations like the ones you mentioned. And it was much easier for us to work with the organizations through their own kind of processes and courses or trainings that they were doing. I think that's great. Bart, I know you didn't do pilots yourself, but you worked with the pilots as a knowledge partner. What was your experience from that interaction?
Well, I think that Charlie told already very interesting things to start with. I guess in the start of the project, we were a little bit optimistic that safe spaces would be a kind of model, a kind of method, very clear, a location, a timing, a group, and so forth. But after some months, we realized that both the local context of our pilots and the organizational context, we had outreach youth workers, we had cities doing things, we had a school, and so forth. So we had to leave that idea of a fixed model that we would implement, and change it to a more bottom-up development of a kind of idea of a safe climate where young people can be together, have difficult conversations, express grievances with teachers or with youth workers or with professionals in a non-repressive way, in a pedagogical climate. And that was very interesting, because by doing field visits and reading the observations of the people who did the safe space activities, we could then see some possibilities, but also some problems. For example, within the context of prevention work, you have you want to deal with a specific problem, and that's not necessarily the thing that young people want to discuss or the thing they are worried about. And for example, they can be worried about body shaming, and we are worried about violent extremism. And then we had some very good experiments and very good practices where they had this like in seat by the meeting points, where they came together and decided together, the professionals and the young people, where will we discuss about. And also I heard from Charlie when John Nicholas had this discussion. It was also about the things that young people believe, or the things that they are not sure about when talking about fake news. So by doing the development bottom up, I guess also that there was more occasion for agency of young people within the Safe Space project. And a last thing that we developed at the end of the project is that we saw some examples, for example, when visiting with our partners a project in Antwerp called BAS, and other experiences, for example, when visiting the young people, very active in Portsmouth. I just forgot the name of the organization, but they were really about participation and about Unlock, I guess. Mm-hmm. It was Unlock, yes. These experiences triggered us to develop the concept of brave spaces. So the idea that, yes, a safe space is a place where you're protected against repression or discrimination or problems that you have outside the safe space, but it at the same time, it has to be a bridge to outside, to strengthen yourself also as a group, to express some grievances, to talk about things in your local society, to have dialogue with policymakers or with institutions, so that it's not only a kind of protection idea, but also a kind of emancipation idea. And so in our last publication that is now at this moment ready, some of our researchers developed this text of From Safe Space to Brave Space. And I guess also that thanks to this bottom-up development, we were able to think further. And I also guess that when we really want to address violent extremism, that that the model you presented, Vas, where we not only support young people in their networks, but also give them really a good climate for having these difficult conversations, and also for expressing grievances about what they experience as injustices, that we can move the whole idea of prevention of violent extremism in Europe a step further than just thinking it's about what is in their head. It's just about their ideas, and we have to change their ideas, that we have a more broader and a more, I think, an interesting way of thinking of how can we strengthen the protective factors, challenge challenge the risk factors. So despite COVID, despite all difficulties we had in the pilots, and there were lots of difficulties, I found that in the combination of pilot work and visits and interviewing all kinds of practices in our regions, we could develop, I think, a very interesting model of safe space work. If people are interested, there will be an English, a French, and a Dutch version of the text. We can maybe send it to the people joining this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. There's a question about giving examples and descriptions of brave spaces, but let's keep that for the end in the audience questions. So Hilde, I'll come to you. Not for the pilot so much. I think we've addressed the pilot's issue extensively, but one thing I wanted us to discuss, because I think it's important an important learning point from the whole project, and you as the project manager is probably best place to talk about, is what were the challenges of international cooperation that you think would be useful to communicate to other similar initiatives, so they can avoid any kind of hurdles or pitfalls that we faced, and what were the positives as well?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Yes, there were challenges. So I don't know if we have found all the solutions, but it's important, I think, to be conscious before you start with such a project, be conscious of the challenges. And one of the easiest thing, or one that comes to mind quite easily, is language. Mm-hmm. I think that is an issue with it. It's maybe quite mundane, I think, but not only in communicating, that everybody needs to, or at least speak one of the languages. And mostly it's English then, but still there was a difference in level, the way you can communicate. That's one thing. And then it's, of course, translation of documents, things that we developed. You could say, okay, most of the things we do in English, but for some of the, especially, I think, products that are focused on youth workers, on people who are really working in the field, you just can't give documents in English to a French youth worker or Dutch youth worker. So these are things you have to consider, also budget-wise, time-wise. Those are important things. Then for the Interreg project, I would say, and you also already mentioned it in the beginning of your talk, we had knowledge partners, we had these social youth work organizations, we had local governments, which all have their typical kind of focus. They all have their different kind of language sometimes also, the jargon. So matching all these wasn't easy. It was really sometimes a cacophony, you could say. But then working together and having sometimes discussions and conflicts on how to understand things, you can work this through. I think one of the key things that we developed is, the concept we had, is that we didn't go for the products, the trainings we developed without context. So like Charlie also mentioned, they are quite flexible, and that's the thing. So the things we developed are flexible and can be used in different contexts. So it's not something overall that's applicable to everywhere around the world. No, you have to do a bit of work and apply it to your own context.
Mm-hmm.
That's
and
why
any positives that you can think?
learning curve.
Learning curve. Yeah, that was great.
That's great.
I think it was a very interesting experience for myself as well. I think we benefited a lot from the different viewpoints. Both on a culture and country level, and we learned a lot about different cultures, even if they are EU countries. I think we know well. Sometimes when you don't really, you realize you don't know as much, and you learn a lot.
You learn also a lot about yourself by looking through the eyes of someone else. So
exactly.
Bas, can I add something to this? What I found interesting was it wasn't the international kind of differences that were the biggest obstacle for us. It was the obstacles between organizations, I found personally. So between a local authority. So for example, myself and Hilda, we're both local authority, would have more in common than us and a higher education establishment in the UK or in another country, just because of our roles and responsibilities. So that difference for me was the biggest issue, because obviously as a organization, a political organization, and as officers within that organization, we have to be as politically neutral as we can be, because we represent all of our residents in the city. So we have to kind of maintain that as well. And it's also just about how, and we've had this conversation about how critical can we be of government policies also within our project. That was something that we had quite a bit of discussions around, and I think we did come to an agreement on that, and that was very beneficial. But it was between organisations that I found the biggest challenges and obstacles. But actually, the richness that partnership brings to dealing with these challenges overrides for me any of the barriers that we had. So I just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Charlie. Bart, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I think when you look at the trainings, what was very special that we developed these trainings in duos, transnational. So we worked with Charlie and John of Portsmouth together on the training on controversial issues, and that was very challenging, because then you have this organizational and this local and this national context and this ideas about what is controversy, what is democracy, what is polarization. So very fundamental issues, and also very practical issues. How can we give some advice, practical advice, to teachers and youth workers? So it was a very challenging training to develop, but my colleagues and I were very pleased and very happy with the way that John and Charlie took this challenge, and that we were able to develop this training together. And I'm certain that it would never be of the same quality and usability when we would have made it ourselves. It's a huge difference. Also because it was discussed by the youth workers and by some people of Mechelen who were in the field of youth work, commenting on that. So for me, that was really the huge advantage of working together as a process, but also in the products. You see in the products also.
I think just to respond to that, but I think I agree with you that the way a university would communicate in terms of developing a document is so different than a local authority would do in terms of kind of the accessibility. So just to give an example, we would write a guidance document that would be very short, impactive, wouldn't at all really reference any theoretical background, or little or no references to academic documents. So I think we developed a middle ground, and also we had a manual and a resource pack that made it accessible to people, and some PowerPoint presentations as well. So we kind of did this hybrid approach. I think people can
or
really
the best of both worlds.
Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'll move on to our next question, which is about our recommendations. What do you think are the challenges for implementing the recommendations that we've developed from the project, and how do you see these recommendations happening or not happening, or being implemented in some way in the future? Do you want to start, Hilde?
Yeah, we did a small survey in the beginning of January. Pilot area sent out a survey to within their network. We had some responses, and I must say that no, overall it was very positive. But there were, I think, two topics, and it's about really implementation of safe spaces, and there's still some hesitance, or some people aren't confident on how to really start a safe space and how to deal with this. And the second was the topic of politicization, the struggle of young people. So they understand the concept, or they support it, but the step toward practice is still something I think we could help both local governments and youth organizations.
Invest more effort then in working in these areas of how to develop safe spaces and politicization. For us, these were two core elements as well. And as Bart highlighted, we've developed the concept of safe spaces to brave spaces now. So I think that's a very fertile ground to work for the future as well. But what do you think?
It doesn't surprise me that the supporting young people in expressing grievances or fighting injustices from the standpoint of leaders of organizations or policymakers is a difficult one, because it was a difficult one 10 years ago in the context of de-radicalization or preventing radicalization, and it is still a difficult one, because the whole idea is that grievances are one of the risk factors, and that it is important to give people experiencing grievances channels to express these grievances, because this is also preventive in a way, because then otherwise it goes underground, and otherwise it becomes it can become violent and so forth. But yeah, so theoretically, a lot of policymakers agree with that. Practically, it's a tricky one. It gives unrest in society. It is about activism of young people. It is about people disturbing and questioning some things in the existing organization or local community or society. So it's not that easy. So that's the reason why we really did some action research in 12 cases and developed this practice book, Get Up, Stand Up, and we changed the name. We didn't call it handbook politicization, but about young people fighting injustices and young people. Where is our position then as professionals, as organizations? How can we support them, and how can we support them? And I really think this is a very key question, not only for youth work but also for schools. I'm working in higher education, and the question is, what do we do as a higher education, as a University of Applied Science, when we see that some of our students really meet injustices in their life, and do we support them? We don't have this tradition to be, sometimes activist as a university, and I think that's not. I think it. We should think about it, and in the whole idea of less violent extremism in society. Yeah, we also should think about that. But it's a tricky one. It's a difficult one. I agree with that.
Thanks, Bart. Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with Bart on that, and I think the difficulty with the safe space issue, and we did some research with college students, and almost 40% of college students only speak about controversial issues when a big event happens. So young people do speak about things, but normally an education establishment would deal with it when they're almost on the back foot. When something happens, it could be a terrorist event, or it could be discussions around what's going on at the moment with Andrew Tate, for example. So they only deal it with an issue arises, but it's around being on the front foot about these things, and actually developing a policy where or an approach where you're exercising these safe space skills all the time. And it doesn't have to be about controversial issues. Like, John Nicholas, who worked with us on this issue, would say that don't start with the most controversial issue. Exercise these debates on kind of smaller scale debates around things. He gives a good example about, he went into school in Portsmouth, and he knew he wanted to talk about a sensitive issue, but he started off with, should pineapple be on pizza? That was his first discussion. So that started off a big debate within the classroom, and then it moved on. Once you built that trust, once you knew that you could change opinion based on different information. So it was a slow approach. So I think it's around building it into the existing work the school does before something happens. Because if you're just reacting to something, you're not in the best position to deal with it at all, because you just haven't approach this issue at all. And it's just around, if people haven't seen give another plug. If people haven't seen the products, go to the website, download them, have a look at them, and it will talk about having it as a more of a medium to a long-term approach, really. So it's not just reacting to things.
Thanks, Annie, for providing the link. For those of you in the meeting, you can see it in the chat, and you can see our website, and there's all sorts of different resources there for you to review. I'm conscious we've got some audience questions that are very interesting, so I want to move to those a little bit. So I'll probably ask Bart to give us some specific examples and descriptions of possible brave spaces. How do these look, or what are we trying to make them look like?
Yeah. Maybe I give a very specific example that we all visited in Antwerp. It was BAS. It's an organization with, let's say, migrant youth, female Moroccan people joining a safe space. And let's say in the safe space discussing about, for example, gender issues, about toxic male behavior, things that they found difficult in their life, and then making a theater and showing the theater to a group of in the community, to a group of young people, also young men, and discussing then about these things, and also then involving young men in a young place, in a safe space, about how they feel like obliged to be macho, and how they can change that behavior, because also they felt, and that also the young men were embarrassed by the way they were expected to behave in the public sphere. So I guess this is a very, very specific example of how you first have to create a safe environment to discuss these emotions and these grievances and these problems. And then there is an artistic process of making a theater play. And there is then the public moment and also a safe, comfortable setting of playing this and having this discussion afterwards, moderated, very good. And then what was very interesting, then you have a new safe space for the young man, wanting to share their emotions and their feelings and their problems with their role in this gender stereotype thing in Antwerp. So this is just one example, but I guess it gives you an idea how it can move from the one point to the other.
I think one point I wanted to make that for me became obvious as we were doing the project was also how organic the project was, in terms of we wrote something in a proposal because that's how it works in order to get the funding. And obviously when you go out and you try to implement things with young people, especially in a COVID period where things radically changed as well, the project really developed very organically, and the concept of the brave spaces, I think, was something that came to us rather than us, going to it. So I think this was one of the most organic aspects of the project in terms of how it developed through our interactions. I know we have one more question, but please, if you have any more, let us know. Will Bergstrom is asking, what was our sampling strategy for the groups involved, and why did we target those specific groups? I just want to highlight, this was not a research project per se, it was a social innovation project. So I want to start with Charlie to tell us maybe how the targeting of the people that we would be working with happened. And again, that was a very organic process. I think it wasn't something that we designed on paper. But Charlie, do you want to tell us a little bit about how it worked in Portsmouth?
Yeah, thanks, Will, for the tricky question on that. Essentially, there wasn't. So we've got a number of different networks in the city. So we've got, I can speak about schools. So we've got Portsmouth Education Partnership. So the so that the offer to be part of the project and to receive the training was put through that particular network. And we also contacted the safeguarding leads at the colleges within the city to give them the offer of receiving this training and explain to them about what Orpheus was about, kind of the benefits and the things like that. So it was more of a kind of put the feelers out through the network and then see what responses we came back. So there wasn't any specific targeting, or we didn't go down a particular route that we wanted this demographic. So it was put out there through our existing networks for schools and higher education, further education.
Thanks, Charlie. Hilde, Bart, anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe we didn't really target, and we really wanted also to avoid targeting, because I think the topic of polarization, radicalization, connecting to society, cohesion is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
In our application form, when we wrote about vulnerable young people, but I think we extended it to all young people, because there's different kind of polarization going on in different kind of youth groups. So.
And I think, you highlight a very interesting issue here, because that's something we've been working on with Annie on a paper that we are writing on cyber awareness, but something that started from our experience with Orpheus. And we are talking about the concept of vulnerability and how vulnerability is something that changes as well. So we don't really realize we might be vulnerable. We might feel we're very resilient, but there might be elements that we were vulnerable without realizing, or certain life conditions like someone losing their job or losing their partner might change how they might be vulnerable. And we are looking at cybercrime and vulnerability here. So we're talking about whether someone might be more vulnerable to romance fraud. They might not be vulnerable if they are, happily married, but if they are divorced, for example, and they're alone, they might be more vulnerable. And that has nothing to do with how aware they are of romance fraud or their technology or any kind of elements that are endemic to how this happens. It's more about their own vulnerability increasing because of their life's conditions. And I think when we were working with safe spaces, that became obvious as well, how young people would be coming to the safe spaces and then they might be discovering vulnerability when they didn't even think that they might be vulnerable, or they were seeing the vulnerabilities of other young people.
Yeah, like the example Bart gave with mature behavior and what that does to young men.
Yeah, definitely. Bart, anything else? You okay? Nothing to add? Okay, that's good. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, I want to close with one question. What are our hopes for the future of Orpheus? What would we like to see in the future, having worked in this project for all these years? What would be our hope for what we've done?
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
Well, very specific. We are now preparing a piece of development research, action research in Flanders about brave spaces. And so what we want to do is, together with organizations, very broader than youth, and in very different contexts, to see in which conditions and with what kind of guidance of professionals and so forth, brave spaces can develop. And so I guess that the things that were started in Orpheus, we go further with that. So that's not only a hope, but that's also a perspective, a really perspective, because and then what we all also see, and that's we are very glad with that, is that we have a lot of questions for workshops in the Dutch language for the moment, in the Netherlands and in Belgium, about Get Up, Stand Up. both in youth work and social work education, but also in youth work organizations and also in schools. So that is unexpected, more than expected, and also is, yeah, I hope you could say, but also a very a perspective of, yeah, okay, there will be more work done in different contexts to support young people, to think about our role in supporting young people experiencing injustices, and I think that's a good thing for a more sustainable society. So yeah,
thanks,
that's
Bob.
good.
Yeah, Charlie, what do you think?
I think just as an operational person, really, I'd like to make sure our products don't gather dust on them, really, so they're actually used, or cyber dust, because we haven't printed them off. But so actually that they're actually used by people, and then they do make a difference. Because what we're seeing is, especially online, a lot of polarized viewpoints, and then people only speaking to the like-minded people in echo chambers, and when they suddenly rub up against somebody that has a different view to them, that can be a shock to some people. And what we don't want to happen is that results in violence or some sort of harm, or something negative to happen. So I'd like us, maybe not, the expectation is people are not going to read products cover to cover and use all of them, but even if they take the key nuggets out of the training and apply them to their daily work, I think for me that would be a really big success. That's what I'd wish for.
Thanks, Charlie. Hilda, anything to add?
Yeah, and like maybe Charlie already mentioned, but the link between online and offline is really an important issue, and will be an important issue. And it's in youth work, but also in local government, in developing policy. That's still an important issue, and will stay an important issue.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Annie, would you like to add your hopes here, maybe? I'm putting you on the spot here, I know.
I think what I would really like to see is, I agree with everything that's been said, but what I really like to see is kind of like a widespread engagement with the pyramid model, and just starting at those slightly lower levels of the pyramid level, and a focus on young people's well-being, rather than waiting until there's a problem and then focusing and stigmatizing young people because we haven't supported them enough earlier. So that's, for me, that's kind of the thing that has impacted on me the most throughout the project, and that's what I'd really like to see being taken forward into policy making, future, and operations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we all have realized how difficult things are, and how you need to start from the wider levels of the pyramid before you focus on the narrower parts of that pyramid that we were talking about earlier. I cannot see any more audience questions, unless I've missed anything, Annie. I don't think so. So I think we can finish here. I want to thank all my colleagues on the panel, and a big thank you to Annie for being with me on the project and helping out, along with Shakiba Mukadam of Tadia, who would not be here today. But I really hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope we've convinced you to go to the website and have a look at the products and the videos. And as Charlie said, you're not going to read it from start to end, but there's some really interesting information there, not just if you are youth workers or teachers, but also for personal use, especially when we're talking about online awareness or fake news and spotting fake news and misinformation. I think there's some useful tools there that can be very everyday life tools. So we hope we'll find them useful. And we are looking at ways of working. Bart highlighted how they are already working on some of the aspects of Orpheus. We are also working on more theoretical aspects of what we've learned from Orpheus in terms of cyber awareness, and different tools and theories that we're trying to put to use and write about. So you might see something from us in the future in relation to this. Thank you for coming. And the project is finishing soon, so you will still be able to find the content on our website. That's all from us. Have a lovely evening.